And this is why I want to define professional science journalism as related to organizations. Professional science journalism uses and develops specific routines in a journalistic organization that allow for a regular observation of science and the reporting on topics related to science. So the stress here is on develop specific routines in a journalistic organization. And of course, if this is done regularly, you will end up with a science beat. This is why I call it the most important structural representation of professional science journalism. So it's not a university professor who once in a while writes a commentary for a newspaper. That's not professional science journalism. Professional science journalism is people who do this either for or with organizations on a regular basis. And that's what makes it professional. But I want to stress, again, I'm not only talking about science journalism. I do hope somebody will pick up on it for his master's thesis or so. You can do the same thing for finance journalism, professional cultural journalism, professional sports journalism. You can say professional sports journalism uses and develops specific routines in journalistic organizations that allow for a regular observation of sports events. Very much the same thing, right? And I would say that all this somehow helps us towards producing journalistic quality. Because it's not just any repeating of what's there already, but it's the regular observation by a journalist who knows it's his professional craft and knows his organization that leads to something other people can't do.
If you analyze a blog, someone who does a blog with this model.
Yeah, it's not journalism. Journalism starts with two sources, of course. Blogs, a scientist who blogs is not a journalist, although he thinks he's a journalist. It's not.
And could you do an analysis with what you've come up there? And if you started describing what a blogger does, how would it fit with this?
Yeah. Again, I would say a blogger is not in a news organization. He's not doing it regularly, professionally in that sense. But there's other. I think that. But there's maybe that's not the strongest part of this approach. I think against the blogger, you can always say he doesn't do research. First of all, before we talk about how his work is organized, he doesn't have sources. He doesn't double check and all these. But these are professional routines that are part of my path through this corridor, which he doesn't apply. He just writes. Journalism is much more than writing. Okay, and. There's a small history of newsroom research, not only in Germany, in many countries, of people who've actually decided to not only write about journalism or complain about journalism, but to actually go there and look at it. Very much like an intern or like an anthropologist, just to go and see what do they do. I just witness, maybe I observe for a while and see what happens. And there are a few people who've done this actually in science journalism. I've put them here just to give you an idea. I will not describe these individual newsrooms for you because it's not of interest to you to know how the press agencies and the regional and national newspapers in Germany equip their science beats. But I do want to say that I've looked at a number of them, and I've also looked at the papers others have written, and I've now come up with some ideal types that I'll introduce in a minute. I do want to give you a rough idea of how I worked, just in case somebody comes up with the idea of doing something better than this. I found analyzing time structures very, very useful. So I did analyze how topics went through the newsrooms and how topics were shaped and changed in this process. But I also did a very stupid exercise of putting down every single action of an editor throughout the whole day. So I just sat there and wrote down telephone call to his colleague, I wrote down checking through his post, having a sandwich, discussing with the intern, and so on. And after that, when doing this, you find out half of the time on German public radio, the editors are in communication. They don't write, they communicate. They shape topics. They discuss with their colleagues what they're going to do next. And this is where it's getting interesting. We need to understand these 50% of the editor's work if we want to understand journalism. I won't go into the details, but it's enough to say that it's a lot that people communicate. Well, I have to admit that there are the people who really write are the freelancers also. And I didn't observe the freelancers. The editors are the ones who go to the conferences, who hold the responsibility, but who also check through a lot of sources and discuss a lot on how the framing of the stories can be done. And just one other example of a result I found is the difference between science journalists that have an own daily science program and science journalists that have no own daily science program, and their communication structures. So what you see here on top, the dark blue, is reporters. They discuss a lot with reporters of their own beat, their direct colleagues over the table or next door. They, of course, discuss with the editors and presenters of their own beat. But what's interesting is the green columns here. Those science journalists with own daily science programs, they hardly ever or very rarely communicate with colleagues from other beats. But those who have no own program, they have to still sell their stuff to Page One or to the morning show or to the evening special programs. So they communicate most of their time, of course, with people from other beats. So there, of course, you see that in the organizational structure change, there's a different way of dealing with the topics and a different way of shaping also the topics when you're forced to sell your stuff and when you're forced to cooperate with the other people. You cannot stay in your corner at the very end of the couloir and do your own little thing. There you have to face the others and face their demands, face their questions, and maybe do the 10th report on nuclear energy. Okay, so after looking at everything that has been published so far, which is not so much, on Science Beats, I now come up with 4 different ideal types, as I call them, for Science Beats, and I'm really looking forward to your feedback. Maybe at the end of this session you'll have a 5th ideal type for me. The publication will be out in 2 months, so there's no way I can change it, but I'm happy to discuss it. So it's 4 types. I will name them and then go through them one by one. There's the current news science beat, the creative science beat, the audience and business-oriented science journalism team, and 4th, the specialized correspondence office. Okay, so let's start with the first. It's quite easy to get. It's the current news science beat. It aims at continuous and complete reporting of current science news. It has its specialized page and program. It chooses among a large number of sources. It has strong routines for news selection. It has, you can see an enormous difference when observing different beats or different departments when you look at the sources they use. There are really good science beats that really invest a lot of time in searching for sources other people don't have, or they have a very systematic way of going through all the websites that might have new stuff for them. And others just take whatever comes around the corner suddenly because some freelancer offers it, or because it's offered by the press agencies, obviously. And others are really, they actually have one person doing nothing else the whole day, but looking through what is new. Well, where are maybe new sources that we could use in the future? So this ideal current news science beat is very strong here. And of course, it has an idea of how to select among this large amount of news, those news that are really relevant for a general overview of science. So they're more, on one hand, this ideal beat is oriented towards science because it is the classic end of couloir science journalism, but it's also in a way very journalistic because it tries to have the latest news and as in some form of completeness. Well, journalism will never be complete, but there'll always be a definition of which stories should be there. And it has a very effective way of processing all these news. So in German public radio we have a program where every contribution has to be 4 minutes, so it can be quickly exchanged. So all contributions are 4 minutes. So if something new happens, they kick out 3 and they put 3 new in. So there's no there's no discussion. There's no waste of time of whether they should shorten it by 2 minutes or whether they should add something new. It's really fast. They can just add it up. Now, of course, the news agencies have, as you know, very fixed lengths for their stories and very clear processes of how they are cross-checked, how they are sub-edited, and so on. So they're very effective at news production. And you rely, if you know, maybe the New York Times also, well, maybe that's not a good example, but I'll come with one in a minute, from the Anglophone world, where take New Scientist. You know the New Scientist magazine? Every week, if you read the New Scientist, you can be sure that you have every story there is in science. Anything that is of importance to a general interested reader and to the science community, it's in there. And you can rely on this, and this is why people buy this magazine. But if you look at the New Scientist, at least the news sections, they always have the same style of writing. It's a really good style, but it's not very creative in the sense that they don't develop new formats all the time. They have good feature stories, but it's a fixed format. They don't come up with something crazy like Wired all the time. Okay, my second ideal type is the contrary. It's if you will, the creative science beat. It's more like Wired. It's these crazy people who work in this structure of autocracy, who have some liberty, who maybe only produce once a week or once a month a product. You know, these weekly newspapers that sometimes their science sections are much stronger because they have the whole week to decide what they want to do. And when they cover, you know, the explosion in Japan, they really have the important facts for you, and maybe they have, you know, taken more time to think about what is really relevant and what is just news garbage. But these beats don't care to omit certain news. They say, well, we don't have a perspective of our own on this subject. We don't do it. They don't care for completeness. They will only present special stuff, like the magazines. I don't know Discover magazines so well, but National Geographic, Geo, it has to be the special story. It cannot be just anything.